How to sew the Carpenter's star blocks, part of the Sampler Quilt Block of the Month by Amber Makes, available in a choice of 2 prints. Follow me and I'll show you how to make 3 variations of the traditional Carpenter's star. Cutting out. Take the printed fabric panel that comes with your kit and give it a press. I'm going to show you the following tutorial with the China Blues colourway, but if you're using the Country Garden, the prints are the same, they're just different colours, so you can just follow it. Now cut around the edge of all the pieces, but keep the fabric numbered label above them, so you don't need to cut exactly around the outside of the print, but you can cut within the white lines. You'll also have some plain fabric in your kit. So you can see here, fabric 1, I've kept the label on the top and there's a little bit of white fabric around the edge, because in a moment we're going to cut these into smaller pieces, but it's much easier if you just keep the label above, because you'll be trimming it off when you cut it into smaller pieces in a moment. So here's all the fabrics and I've put them into order. There's number 6, number 7 and number 8. Now, following the measurements and the instructions, cut out all of the pieces and label them. You can just write the labels onto a scrap of paper if you want. I've printed mine out just so that you can see them better, but cut them all out and label each one, because some of the blocks use the same fabric. Once you've done that, arrange them all into 3 piles. So you'll have labelled them block 1, block 2, block 3 with their fabric piece, which might be fabric A HST or fabric C square, all different sorts. So label them. Also cut your plain fabric as listed in the instructions using the measurements, and again put those into piles. It's much easier to work on one block at a time. So if you arrange all your piles, and then you can put the pile to one side that you're not going to use, so that you're just working on one, and it's a lot less confusing. So now you're all in piles, so you are ready. There's block 1, there's block 2 and there's block 3. Now you're ready to start sewing. How to make 4 at a time HSTs. Take 2 pieces of fabric, the one listed in the instructions, and place them right sides facing. The raw edges will all match up because they're the same size. The instructions will tell you which pieces to put in, as these 4 at a time HSTs are used in several of the blocks. So the instructions will tell you the size to cut and the pieces that you're making into 4 at a time, but these are the instructions to show you how to do it. So pin them together, then sew them together all the way around using your 1/4 inch seam allowance, not leaving any gaps, just sew them together all the way around so you've got a little pocket. Now place the 2 pieces of fabric on your cutting mat, and you're going to cut diagonally across from one corner to the opposite corner. So line up your ruler and cut along. Now if you've got a rotating cutting mat, you can turn it round. If you haven't, just turn the squares round, but make sure they stay together, and then cut across the other diagonal. This separates those 2 pieces now into 4 triangles. So place these on your ironing mat or your ironing board, and open up the triangles, and you need to press them towards the darker fabric. So I like to just finger press these to start with. It's just a bit quicker to just open them up, make sure they're nice, and you just finger press them. Because they're small, it's a bit more fiddly with the iron to try and open and press, so just finger press them open. Then take your iron and press them nice and flat into squares. So now you've got 4 squares made, and each one is made up of 2 triangles. They're a bit bigger than you need because it's much better to cut them accurately afterwards. I'm going to just take one. Now for this one, I'm going to cut it into a 2-inch square. Your instructions will tell you what size. So line up the diagonal line on your ruler so that the 2-inch marking is central. So I'm going to cut a little bit off one side and the top. Turn it around and now line it up so that 2-inch square marking on your ruler lines up with the bottom and the left-hand side, and then trim up the side and across the top. And the reason across the top I cut from left to right is because I find if I cut from right to left, sometimes it nicks the edge off my ruler. And if you do it this way, then it saves your ruler. When you've got to cut quite a few, well, obviously you'll be cutting 4, but with some of them, you might be cutting more than that if you're doing several at a time. I find it easier to do them in groups. So lay them all the same way up, and again, place the diagonal line of your ruler along the diagonal line, sewn line, and make sure that it's central so that there's a little bit sticking out beyond the right hand side and a little bit sticking out beyond the 2-inch marking. So again, up the side and across the top. You can cut from right to left if you prefer. It's just it saves my ruler if I do it this way. Then move them up slightly away from the cut pieces and then place the bottom so that the 2-inch marking is in the bottom left-hand corner, and make sure that diagonal line is still running along the seam line on your square. It's just when you're cutting lots and lots like this, you'll find if you do it in groups, it's just quicker because it's less movement. Now you've trimmed all your HSTs and they're absolutely perfect 2-inch squares, so that when you make your block, it will fit together better because all the pieces are accurately cut. So that's how to do 4 at a time HSTs. How to make 8 at a time HSTs. Take the 2 pieces of fabric that you've cut for the HSTs, and on the wrong side of the lighter fabric, so for this one I'm using the plain black background fabric, so there isn't a right or wrong side, draw one diagonal line from the one corner to the opposite corner, and then draw another diagonal line from the other corner to the opposite corner, so that the 2 lines meet in the centre. Now you'll need to sew 1/4 of an inch either side of these lines. You can either use your machine foot and judge it, or if you prefer, draw a line 1/4 of an inch to the right of one line and 1/4 of an inch to the right, and then if you turn it round, 1/4 of an inch to the other side. And I'm using a different coloured pen just so you can see, so that the red lines will be the cutting lines and these green lines are the sewing lines. So if you're new to sewing or you haven't done this before, draw these seam lines in and then you can stitch along them. Or as I say, you could use your machine foot to run along the lines, it's up to you. Once you've drawn all the lines, place the 2 pieces of fabric right sides facing, so you've got your drawn lines on top. Match up all the raw edges and pin together. Now it's easier if you keep the pins in while you're sewing, so place the pins near each edge, and if they're far enough away from the seam lines, then you won't need to take them out while you're stitching and everything will stay in place better. Now once you've done that, sew 1/4 of an inch either side of each of the lines so that you're sewing 4 seams in total, and I'm going to sew along my drawn lines. And then it will look like this. You can see the 4 seam lines. Now place your fabric on your cutting mat and cut along those drawn central lines so that you're cutting between the seam lines. Keeping your fabric flat on your cutting mat, turn it around and then cut along the other drawn line. So now you have 4 triangles. But before you move anything, turn it around and cut vertically through the centre. Use the lines on your ruler to make sure that it's straight at the top and the bottom, and then turn it around again and cut vertically through the centre. Again, use the lines on your ruler to make sure that this is absolutely straight, and cut along that line. You've now divided your 2 squares into 8 triangles. So you now need to, just like with the 4 at a time, open them up and press them towards the darker fabric. Now you need to trim them. The instructions tell you what size to trim them to. I'm trimming these into 2-inch squares. So place the diagonal line on your ruler on the seam line, and so that the 2-inch marking on the right is central. Now with this one, I'm going to cut them all in one go. I just find it easier to do it like this. So place the drawn line on the seam line and make sure that the right hand edge and the left hand edge are central. You can see when I'm cutting this, I cut up the side and I cut from the left to the right. And the only reason for that is I find that if you cut from right to left, it can clip off the edge of your ruler. So I always do left to right just because it saves my ruler. But obviously normally you would cut right to left. But as long as you're cutting away from yourself, it doesn't matter. So once you've trimmed those, turn it all around twice, move the HSTs away from the trimmed sections just so you can see them, and then cut them into 2-inch squares. So again, make sure that the diagonal line on your ruler matches up with the seam line, and then you can cut along the right hand side and the left hand side, and make sure that that 2-inch mark matches up exactly. You may find when you do some of them, you don't need to, depending on how you trim the first one, that you don't need to trim the side and the top if it matches up exactly. So make sure that the 2-inch square is exactly the right place. I try to match up the bottom corner, And then I'm not cutting along the top because that's actually the same size. And just continue like this. So you can trim them, so you trim all 4 sides in one go, but I tend to do it so I put all 8 on my mat and then cut them in groups. It just is a quicker method because you're not having to turn everything so often. So now you have 8 HSTs that are all perfectly cut into 2-inch squares. And these are ready now. You can start using them to assemble into your block. Making the Carpenter Star Block 1, we're going to start by making the HSTs. So take all the pieces that you've cut and labelled for Block 1 and lay them all out so you can see which is which. And we're going to start off by making HST1. This is made from 1 fabrique square and 1 background fabric square. So just take one of each, pin the label back on to the other and just put that to one side. Always keep the labels on until you've sewn them together. And then make 8 at a time HSTs from these 2 squares, following the instructions for the 8 at a time I showed you before. So I've made all of these. So there's 8 HST1, all pressed and trimmed. Now repeat that to make another 8 using another fabrique and another background fabric square. So you now have 16 of them. Put them all into a pile and pin or clip them together so you remember that these are 8 HST1. Next we're going to make HST2. This is made from fabric A and fabric B. So take 1 fabric A square, 1 fabric B square and make 8 HSTs. There's the 2 for 1. And you need to make 16 of these, just like before. So place 1A and 1B right sides facing. Cut and trim them so that you've got 16 HST2. And then to make HST3, these are made from fabric B and background fabric. So place these to get right sides facing together. And again, the same with these. You need to make 2 sets so that you're going to make 16 HST3 in total. So there I've finished these, and again I'm going to clip them together just so they're all in one place for when I assemble the Carpenter Star. So there's all my HSTs finished and I can now assemble the block. Assembling the Carpenter Star. The 4 quarters of the Carpenter Star are all made in the same way. So take all the pieces you need for 1 quarter. So you're taking 4 of each of the HSTs 1, 2 and 3, 1 fabric C square and 3 background fabric squares. Take them from the piles but keep the labels on because you'll need them for the other quarters. Now referring to the diagram that's in the instructions, lay out all of these pieces so that they're in 4 rows with 4 pieces in each row. Lay them all right sides up. I put a little space between each of them and then just refer to the diagram as you go. It's really important that you place them all the right way round so that you form the star shape. So just have the diagram next to you while you're doing this and then just double check that everything's the right way round. So that's the second row. You can see as you're placing them that the pattern is forming and the points of the stars are created when you join the rows and the pieces together in each row. So I always check by looking at every single piece and then have a look visually to see if the star is created. Once you're happy that everything's in the right way up, join the pieces together in each row by placing them one at a time, right sides facing, and just join all the four rows. Once you've joined them all together, then you can give them a press. So what I've done with the pieces in the top row, I've pressed the seams to the right. Row 2, I've pressed them to the left. 3 to the right and 4 to the left. That means that you can nest the seams because they will join up together when you sew these rows together. So take the time to do that, it just makes them easier to join. Now join row 1 to row 2. And the seams will nest together so that you can just ease them so they fit. Or if you want to be absolutely sure for matching, then do it this way. Place a vertical pin through the seam on top and then push the pin through the seam on the bottom so that those seams are held exactly together, and then you've matched the seams nicely. If you do this on your ironing board, you can push your pins into the board and then pin them together at one end, and then all you have to do is place a pin through both layers, and then you can remove that vertical holding pin. With small pieces like this, matching the seams is quite easy because there isn't too far for them to stretch out of shape. So you can do them with the pin method like this, or you can nest them by just placing one row on top of the other and just easing them together. So join all the 4 rows together like this, and I've pressed these seams open because there's quite a lot of bulk here, and that's 1/4 complete. Make the other 3/4 in exactly the same way, following exactly the same pattern arrangement. Again, pressing all the seams open. And you can now join them together to make the whole Carpenter's star. Again, there are diagrams in the instructions to show you because you have to turn these round. But make sure that the fabric C hole squares are in the corners, and then that forms the whole Carpenter's star. Now join the 2 squares in the top row together and the 2 quarters in the bottom row together. Again, make sure that you match the seams as you do this, and then that's your 2 halves. I press those seams open due to the bulk of the fabric. And then place the 2 halves, right sides facing, and again match up the seams by pushing pins through so that all the seams match exactly, and then sew them together. And then that's the whole of Carpenter's Star Block 1 complete. Making the Carpenter's Star Block 2. So we're going to start again by making the HSTs first. The instructions will tell you what pieces you need. So take all the pieces for Block 2, place them all together, and then you can just take the pieces you need. So we're going to start off by making HST1. Now with this Carpenter's Star, you use the 4 at a time HST method. So take 1 fabric A, 1 background fabric, place them right sides facing, and following the 4 at a time HST instructions, sew them together, cut them, press them and trim them, and then you will have 4 HST1. Now you need to repeat this to make 20 in total. So you'll need to take another 4 fabric A, keep the label on the remaining one, and then you will need another 4 background fabric squares. Again, make sure you keep the label on. And then sew them together in pairs to make 4 HSTs. And now you will have 20 HST1 in total. So put them together in a pile, clip them together so that they all stay in one place. To make HST2, you need fabric B and the background fabric. You'll need 3 of each of these, and again using the 4 at a time HST method, make all of these. So place them together like this so that you can make them all in one go. Join them together in pairs, sew and trim them, and then you will have 12 HST2 in total. So again, put them to one side and pin them together. HST3 is made from fabric B and fabric C. You'll need 2 of each of these squares. So place them together. I always like to place them like this so I know exactly that I'm using the right fabric for the right ones. And you will make 8 HST3 in total from these. And finally, make HST4. This is made from fabric A and fabric B. You'll only need 1 square of each of these because you're only going to make 4 HST4. So put those together and that's all your HSTs finished. So there they are, all in piles and clipped together. So you've got HST 1, 2, 3 and 4 and you're ready to assemble the block. Assembling the Carpenter's star. The 4 quarters of this star are symmetrical, just like with Carpenter Star Block 1. So in the instructions it will tell you what pieces you need for each quarter. So take the pieces you need for each quarter and put the others to one side for now. It's best to assemble 1 quarter at a time so that you don't get them mixed up. So you've got some background fabric squares, fabric A square, fabric C square. You've got 5 HST1. So just take the 5, clip them, the others back together. You have 3 HST2. And then 2 HST3 and 1 HST4. So basically you're taking a quarter of each of the HSTs and the other squares. Now following the diagram that's in the instructions, place all of these pieces right sides up in the right arrangement. Now you've got more HSTs, different colours than you had when you did Carpenter Star Block 1, so do double check as you're doing it to make sure that you've done each one correctly. And you will see the pattern forming. So when you take one like I've just done, you realise, oh, that's in the wrong place because the pattern doesn't form, because you can see how the fabrics join together to create those star points. So lay them all out and you'll soon see if you've got them in the wrong place, because you'll have one left that doesn't fit in with the pattern. So now they're all laid out, you can see how the star points are all correct. And so just double check that everything's in the right place against the diagram before you join them together. Now join all of these squares together in the top row, side by side. And then repeat that with all of the rows. Make sure that you match up the seams where you've got the points joining. So join all the 4 rows and then they will look like this. And then to help with nesting seams, press all the seams to the right in the top row, to the left in the second row, to the right in the third row, and to the left in the bottom row. Now you can join all these 4 rows together. You can nest the seams, or you can use the vertical pin method to make sure that they all join so that all the seams match. So you can see here I'm just easing them over because I've pressed the seams in opposite directions. Once they're all joined together like this, you've now created 1 quarter. Press the seams open because they're quite bulky and repeat that with the remaining HSTs and squares to make 4 identical quarters. Now you can join them all together to make the whole Carpenter's star. So place the cord following the diagram that's in the instructions to make sure you've got them the right way round. Place them all in order like this. You can see that star is formed in the centre. And then join the 2 quarters in the top row together to make 1/2 and in the bottom. And I'll just show you the seam matching again. So place them right sides facing, and where you've got the points of the HSTs, if you push a pin through the seam, here you can see where the seam is, then push it into the seam below. So you can nest the seams where there aren't the points, but where they are, I'm putting my pin through where the point is and then through the other side, so that I'm just pinning them together exactly where the points meet so that the seam allowance is above them. And then pin them together at the end. And once you've got those holding pins in place, then you can place pins together and remove those. And I know that this takes a bit of extra time, but it's worth the effort. You've only got to make 1 block at a time to actually get these seams matching up. If they don't match up exactly, it really doesn't matter. But by placing these vertical holding pins, you've got a much greater chance of them matching. Then sew that together to make 1/2 and then the other one at the bottom, and press the seam open. You've now got 2 halves. So place these 2 halves right sides facing And again, matching up the seams, sew them together. And there is Carpenter Star Block 2 all complete. Give it a nice press and you have finished your second Carpenter Star. Making the Carpenter Star Block 3, we'll start by making the HSTs. There are 12 different sets of HSTs used in this star, so take all the fabrics for block 3 and then arrange them. You're going to use the 4 at a time method because you make 4 each of these 12. So that I've laid them all out, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, pair 5, 6, 7, 8. The instructions will tell you exactly which fabric is in which set. So there's the 12 sets. Using the 4 at a time method and trimming them following the instructions, place them all so they're all in groups of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, and HST 9, 10, 11 and 12. Then that's all your HSTs ready to complete the block. Assembling the Carpenter Star. This star is made in a slightly different way, that there are 2 pairs of symmetrical quarters. So to make the first pair, following the diagram in the instructions, place all your HSTs and your whole squares right sides up in the arrangement. And then sew the rows together. So sew each of the rows together. And just like you did with the other Carpenter Star block, press all the seams in the top row to one side and the bottom, and the second row the other way. So I go from the right in the first and third row and left in the second and fourth row. Then join those 4 rows together, right sides facing. Again, make sure you take the time to match up the seams, nesting them all using the vertical pin method. And then that creates 1/4. Press the seams open and flat. So that's 1/4 in the first pair. Make another quarter in the first pair, identical, so that you've got 2 identical first pairs. To make the second pair, the arrangement is different. And again, if you follow the diagram in the instructions, or you can just look at the video here and pause it, you can see exactly how they are arranged. But do lay them all out, then check against either the video or the diagram to make sure they're in the right arrangement. And then sew all the rows together and press the seams to one side again in alternate directions, just because this will help with nesting. And it also reduces the bulk because you've got the seams facing in opposite directions. So join all of those rows together, and that makes 1/4 in the second pair. Press the seams open and then make the other quarter in the second pair so it's identical. So you now got 2 of the first pair and 2 of the second pair. So place these all right sides up to complete the whole block. So you've got the first pair in the top left, the second pair in the top right. You've got the second pair in the bottom left and the first pair in the bottom right. So they're alternate. But if you lay them out like this, you'll soon see how it works and the star is formed. Again, check against the diagram to make sure. Now sew together the 2/4 in the top row and the 2/4 in the bottom row to make 2 halves. And you can see, press that seam open, and then with that one I've pressed the seam open, and then place the 2 halves right sides facing, match up the seams by pinning them together, and then sew together to make the whole of the block. So your Carpenter Star Block 3 is now finished. And you've completed all 3 Carpenter Star blocks.